So this is going to be the topic of discussion for a few days now. So okay, I think everybody has studied some algorithms, right? So now we are talking about algorithms on a distributed system. So like I mentioned last week itself, it's a close connection between games and distributed systems. Now what we are talking about here is a set of agents or processes or players, and the main difference is that algorithm theory doesn't look at motivation, goals. There are no preferences over outcomes. So in that sense it's a cooperative situation. But what is the big difference is that there are some extremely interesting communication models and how communication affects coordinated behavior, which is really the big object of study here. Now game theory is very sophisticated in looking at conflict and cooperation, but the communication models are primitive. So my idea was to introduce both style of analysis to you, and you can see, and the hope is that in the future we'll be able to combine techniques from these to get better game models and with better analysis. Anyway, so that's the deal. So what's a distributed algorithm, right? So distributed algorithm basically means that you are given a bunch of n processors, agents, players, whatever you can call it. Let's just say n processes, and they're connected in according to some given topology, right? So n processes. How do you describe the connectivity of these processes? Connectivity meaning who can talk to whom, right? How do you describe that? Assume that, so these are nodes on a graph. So the nodes correspond to processes. So nodes are processes, and edges the presence of an edge means that from node to node n prime mean n can communicate with n prime. Now whether there is synchronous communication, asynchronous communication, you are talking by telephone or email or whatever, makes a difference, and we'll look at that, but this is basically the model, and you want to compute something. Now how does one think about this? Firstly, why look at such problems at all? Trying to achieve something together, yeah. Game theory, for instance, there is no players don't sit on a graph, right? Everybody communicates with everybody else. So it's a kind of a public communication model, but that's problematic, right? You do want to look at private communication. You do want to look at communication where I tell you something another person cannot hear. Such games exist, and it's reasonable to model that way. But apart from that, from a computer science perspective, why look at distributed algorithms at all? What's the question? Yeah, but why model it in this way? Why think of it as a distributed system?
You have n different people communicating to reach a conclusion upon a certain parameter. Basically, you need to have a private communication between them.
You're motivating private communication. Okay, fine. My question is, we know some algorithms. Why look at distributed algorithm? Why bother with distributed computing as such? One reason could be because it's there, right? I mean, internet is there whether you like it or not, but is there a theoretical motivation for it? So also because it's there, it doesn't mean that you have to look at it exactly in that way. Yeah? A Turing machine doesn't look like a dabba, a PC at all, but it's a fine model. It doesn't have to look like it. So yeah. What's the motivation for studying distributed systems, distributed computing, distributed algorithms, whatever?
Faster computation. Divided computation, distributed computation.
Okay, so there is a two terms that are used, and I think there is often some often some confusion about it. So let me just mention these. parallel and distributed. Okay, parallel processing or parallel algorithms is where the idea is you got something to do, you divide it up into n tasks and let people do it in parallel. In cooking you do it all the time, right? You got, depending on the number of processors, the number of stoves that you have got, or one person is cutting onions while somebody else is doing something else, right? While water is boiling for something, you do something else. So that's parallel processing, that's parallel algorithms. The difference between parallel and distributed, they are very similar. It's some convention, that's why. I mean, these are just words, okay. But by convention, when people mean parallel computing or parallel algorithms, what is meant is that there is a task that you want to achieve, you divide it up into independent tasks so that they can proceed in parallel, you take the results together, right, exactly like the cooking model. There is no assumption of geographical distribution. Invariably, all these parallel processes are synchronized by a common clock. Now, if you look at a cluster computer one floor above, sitting here or down the corridor, these are all classic examples of parallel computers, right? Many of these, a large number of parallel processors, but coordinated by a clock, right? So there is a clock, there is a global clock. When it ticks, something happens. Lots of people are doing several things, and again it ticks, lots of people are doing several things like that. And occasionally you collect the results together, farm out more, blah blah blah. Yeah. The word distributed is used for saying that there is no common clock. Means these are autonomous. These are not autonomous here, these are coordinated or driven by some coordinating process, driven by a process, let's say. For instance, very often you talk about master slave configuration and so on. There is one master process that is coordinating these parallel processes, like the master chef in the kitchen. Now this is very different. These are autonomous processes who are doing their own thing. They are not synchronized by any common clock. They do at their own, maybe geographically distributed typically, right, spatially distributed, and computing something. Why should one bother with that? Because this is not, so your supercomputer model is here, right? Cluster computers, all this falls here. This is somewhat different. Any reason why one should bother with something like this?
Suppose you're looking at the internet, there are several processes running. Now, this process runs at one locality and it needs to communicate with some other process running at some other locality to have a, they need to coordinate their processes.
But why not do all my analysis, do all my theory, assuming that they are in one place, and then physically distribute it? But why would I want to bother? Yeah, that's exactly the point. That is, if they are happening elsewhere, I need to order the event somehow. Say this happened before or this happened later, but why would I want to do that? Good question. Yeah. This kind of thing about insisting that there be no common clock, it's a bit bizarre, right? Even if on the internet, surely that clock can be used as a common clock, right? GMT is there and time servers are there, no? Now you can in fact go and read the current time. Remember that distributed computing precedes internet and all this stuff, right? Long before, and Dijkstra started this in the 70s, and I'm sure it sounded even more exotic when people were thinking of it. But there is a very important reason, right? See, when you press a key on your machine, right, how much time does it take? You are providing input to the machine, no? The machine is waiting for input, and you provide input by pressing key yes for Y. How much time does that take? Fraction of a second? Fraction of a second is reasonable, I think, right? I mean, I take probably longer than you, but I think a fraction of a second is reasonable. For how much time does it take for a printer to print a character, laser printer? Come on, we all use laser printers, no? Or order of milliseconds typically. So which means that you are talking about a machine in printing a character can print about 1000 characters by the time you press your hand. Okay. How much is the time taken for an IO device to transfer something to memory? What's the order? I mean, typically IO device is doing something and it transfers a chunk to memory, and then what's the order of? Microseconds. How much time does a CPU need to perform an operation? About nanoseconds today. So we are talking about completely different time scales, right? By the time you press the thing here, your CPU can do a billion operations, right? Can transfer a billion words from some device to memory, right? A printer can print 1000 characters. So they are all processes running on a machine. When you do, PS minus U, right, you will see many daemons running on your system. They are all processes running, but remember that they are operating in completely different time scales. Even though they can be thought of as synchronized by a common clock, it's much wiser to assume that they don't share a common clock, right? Otherwise, if you make a CPU wait for your input, you are committing a huge crime, right? I would say it's ecologically wasteful. To think of something that can do a billion operations sitting and waiting for you to press something, it's ridiculous, right? So that's what multiprogramming was based on. The THE multiprogramming system, first designed by Dijkstra in 1971. Okay, 71 when main memories were 16K, 32K, like that, right? But he saw this potential. He said, look, the moment you start thinking of these as completely independent processes, so speed independence is very critical. You write your processes, design your operating system, assuming that these are completely independent processes which can be scheduled on their own time scales. The fact that they are geographically, spatially located in a single place is an accident. Let's forget about it and do this thing. That, of course, correctness is a real problem in that case, but it's worth it. So that's started the whole theory of concurrent programs, which led to multiprocessing, then concurrent programming, and things like internet today, right? And Dijkstra was talking about semaphores and so on. It looked extremely exotic, but within 10 years, people started doing multiprogramming. And today, you talk about multi-core architectures. Single machine itself is designed as distributed systems. So because we are now reaching limits as far as chips are concerned, so you have to think of these as autonomous processes, let them proceed and do. So computer science is being driven towards this, both at the low end and at the high end. The internet, as you say, is a classic example. So autonomous processors at one end, at the level of internet you want to think about, or at the level of multi-core architectures, how do you program them, how do you come up with algorithms for them is a challenge. Okay. So it's very critical that you think of these as, because there, in terms of the time scales, there is no way you can synchronize a process that's operating in nanoseconds with something that's operating in milliseconds, right? Because clocks drift. If you just look at basic thermodynamics, semiconductors, look at drift, of course they will drift because these are physical processes, right? So there is no hope of synchronizing things at the nanosecond level, right? And or at the level of computations, if you are spending time in synchronizing them, you will waste so much CPU cycles. In doing that, your computation will slow down or lose correctness. So it's better to assume that they are autonomous, operating at completely different speeds. This is the philosophy. Having got that, of course, then for a theoretician, you are just thinking of these as autonomous, so we might as well think about it. Don't worry about speed, etc., after that, right? So how does one design a distributed algorithm, right? So here is a, okay, there are a couple of examples. So let me just motivate by a couple of examples. So how far can you count with your fingers? 1, 2, 3, 4, one hand, 5. Anyone can count more with one hand? Up to 20. Anyone can count more? He can count up to 20 because he says he can use. Then I think you will get 3, only 3 in this, no? No, in this one you will get only 2. 17. 100, how will you? With one hand? No, I want only one hand. Yeah, that is what I would do, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. So what is this? Okay, so I do this with children, they're like primary school children, secondary school children and so on. So the way you do it is that you get, you are too old for that. But with small kids it's great because you line them up. Somebody acts as little finger, somebody acts as, ring finger, somebody acts as middle finger, you just, Now you're going to tell these children how to do this. How would you tell them what to do? Okay, so what are the numbers for which the little finger goes up? All the odd numbers. Okay. What are the numbers for which this goes up? What are the numbers for which this one goes up? You have to be louder. 2 mod 4? No, that's not true. 3. 3, this finger is up. So which are the numbers for which this finger is up? 2 and 3, yes, and then 6, 7. So now watch. Okay, now watch. So somebody watch this finger, somebody watch this finger, somebody watch this finger. Yeah, please. 5 volunteers, please. Huh? Okay, now let me do it again and then. But you should also do it, no? What is 23? Can somebody show me? This is. No, this is not it. What is this? Yeah, you got it. Okay. What is 21? Yeah, right. Okay, with kids it's great fun. I mean, you can have groups and binary race, as I call it. Okay. Anyway, so just watch again. Now you have to remember which finger goes up for where, because there is an algorithm waiting for you, right? Okay. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31. So now let's start. This goes up for all odd numbers, stays down for even numbers. What about this? Yeah, who was watching this? Oh, that is the whole point of my doing it. Yeah, 2 and 3, then 4 and 5 it's down, 6 it's up, 6 and 7 it's. So that is the principle, right? So if you take the little finger, it goes up for odd ones. The next one is the ring finger. This is, it's down for 0, 1, 2, 3 it's up, 4, 5 it's down, 6, 7 it's up, and so on. What about the middle finger? When does it come up? Its value is 4. So 0, 1, 2, 3 it's down, 4, then 5, then 6, 7, 4, 5, 6, 7 it's up, 8, 9, 10, 11 it's down, and then it's on. Okay. What about the index finger? When does it come up? At 8. So 0 to 7 it's down, 8 to 15 it's up, and so on. 23 it's down, 24 to 31 it's up. Thumb, 0 to 15 it's down, 16 to 31 it's up, right? This is your observation, but now the kids are standing. They should be told, so the one who is acting as middle finger has to be told when your hand should go up, when should you put your hand down. How would you? What would you tell that kid? Some 8 or 9-year-old child, yeah.
So when the ring finger completes 2 cycles, or when the little finger completes 4 cycles, so depending on the previous
Cycle, is a 8-year-old. Yeah, you are right, but go on.
So you take a click, 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 click.
Look, this is the middle finger. When does it first go up? Or let's take the index finger. When does it go up? You see that? Yeah? 0 to 7 it's down. The first time it goes up is at 8, right? So what is the number before that? 7. How does 7 look? Here. No, I talked about the index finger. For the index finger, this goes up at 8, right? So if this is the child who is acting as index finger, what should you tell her? Well, watch for 7. What is 7? So look to your right. If when the hands are all up, you know it's your turn next. You should put your hand up. In fact, they should go down, no? At 8. So what should you do? Watch to your right. When all the hands are up, tell them to put it down, and you put your hand up. This is true for the index finger. What about the middle finger? This is 4. What is the number before that? 3. So for any finger, so who doesn't have anything to the right? This fellow. So the algorithm is straightforward. The one who is acting as little finger, what should you tell him? Don't think. Whenever the whistle blows, up, down, up, down. That's all. For everybody else, what is the rule? Look to your right. When all hands are up, ask them to put it down and put your hand up. When should you put it down? Somebody will tell you to. No, you don't have to think about it. Right? Is the idea clear? Okay. You can actually, what are you doing here? You are doing a parallel algorithm. Instead of saying there are processors, I am saying children, right? There are n processors, come on, no problem, right? So you are talking about a n-bit binary counter. This is in fact a design of a parallel n-bit binary counter. What is the connectivity you are assuming in this? Okay. What is the memory you are assuming in this? Up, down. What is that? It's just binary. So this is very different from saying find up to, look to your right if they have come to 7 and so on. You don't have that much memory. You are trying to design a counter, right? Is it clear? You don't need any more memory than 1 bit. But what is the connectivity you are assuming? What is the algorithm? When do you put your hand up? Look to all the fellows on your right. So the algorithm that I talked about assumes complete connectivity, or at least that every processor should be able to see all the processors to its right. Right? This is for children you can see visually, so there is no issue, but otherwise you have to describe the connectivity carefully, right? So you are assuming that they are connected at least as a pipeline, right? The little finger doesn't need to be connected to anything else. This fellow has to be connected to the little finger. This one has to be connected to both of them, and so on. So this is what you will call a pipeline architecture, right? It's connected as a pipeline. So everybody at any point can see down the pipe. Okay, it's a unidirectional pipe. But do you need it? Now think about, can I eliminate that connectivity? Any ideas? And remember that the connectivity is two-way. No, it's not, it's only one way. I tell somebody to put it down, put up, and somebody tells me, yeah. Connectivity is unidirectional. Can you modify it in such a way that I need to look at only my neighbor? Okay, so how? Tell me, what is the algorithm? What is the rule for my little fellow? Somebody who is acting as middle finger, he has to put his hand up.
You say there's one process, it gets some number from the process below it. So it is raising his hand up, increments the counter by 1 and sends it to its.
Increase counter by 1 and so on. Kaha hai? There is no memory. You are designing a counter. Yeah. I mean, this is a highly artificial problem, but remember that the rules of the game are clear, right? So you should think in those terms. Yeah. Any other this thing? Look at, okay, let's go back. This fellow is going to just put up and down. There is no communication requirement at all. Yeah. Huh. It's not put it down, that's what I want to say. Yeah. Yeah, okay, puts it down, then what do? You toggle your state. See, look at this. So when does this fellow put up the hand? 2, right? This one knows when to put it down, the little finger, right? As soon as the little finger toggle goes down, you toggle your state. So let's check that it works, right? 0, no problem, I don't have anything to do. 1, I have nothing to do. 2, it goes down, I toggle my state. And then 3, I don't have to do anything. 4, it goes down, I toggle my state. And since this goes down, this one toggles its state. So the algorithm is very simple. You look to your immediate right neighbor. So the algorithm is, if you have no right neighbors, toggle on each tick. If you have a right neighbor, whenever she or he goes down, toggle your state. That's it. So we are bringing it down to 1 bit memory and just one right neighbor connectivity, only one direction. Okay. So this is the style. I am not going to say anything more. This example is supposed to motivate you to thinking that this is the style that you are interested in. What are the resources that you are after? Remember, any algorithm have preferences. By preferences, what do I mean? He wants 1/3 of the cake, I want half the cake, right? She says, look, I don't want the cream, I want the portion where there are some nuts and raisins and so on. Whereas he says, look, I want the cream, in fact I want the cherry which is there. So everybody has their preferences, right? Now what you want to do is to divide the cake, hopefully according to people's preferences, right? And you want to minimize dissatisfaction at least, right? Question is, how would you divide up the cake in such a way that everybody feels that they are not, very badly off? How would you go around? One way is find somebody, mother is always there. You go to mother, everyone describes the preferences and she decides then you get this, you get this. And then the problem simply shifts to whether the mother did a reasonable job or not. So this is typically the way you do resource allocation. Resource allocation is dealt with in computer science by saying you come up with an algorithm to which you report all your preferences, all your these things, and the algorithm makes an allocation, and then you compare the allocation with whatever is your private preference, etc., and you maximize, minimize. Okay. You could elect a leader and do. That's basically the mother that I'm talking about, right? But supposing you are not doing that. Supposing preferences are private. Everyone has preferences, but they are private. They don't want to tell anyone about it. You don't want to, so you don't want player I to know player J's preferences. Okay, there are lots of reasons why you might want it, but I mean we have discussed game theory, those things are like built into the game models usually. Yeah, in which case you don't want to tell all your secrets to somebody, right? So this is in fact the departure and a nice example showing the difference between games and distributed algorithms, because it provides for, we are talking about private communications, etc., right? So in particular private preferences is something that you can model very nicely. In game theory, the payoff matrix or preferences over outcomes is supposed to be not just public but common knowledge. Everyone knows what others' preferences are. Is it possible to come up with plays where preferences are private? It's extremely interesting game theoretic question, and you can do it, but it gets quite tortuous. It's a very simple model, that's it. They are all sitting at the table, we are only going to act, you have to derive my preference based on the way I act, that's all, right? Okay. Now what are the moves that are allowed? You can cut. Let's say that there is a knife available on the table. Maybe if you want 3 knives, there are 3 knives on the table, whatever, and everybody can cut a piece. Cake, so you can always cut it nicely and realign it, etc., etc. Don't worry about it. Somebody wants cream, you can just take it, etc. Yeah. What would be a rule by which they can? Any idea? What would you recommend? Firstly, who starts? So of course, so by the symmetry in the problem, it means anybody can start. That's what you say, right? That's exactly what I'm looking for, right? Numbering it 1 to n and all doesn't matter. It should be completely. So if the problem statement is symmetric, you want the solution to be symmetric as well. Now this is not a trivial thing to achieve, but it seems like a reasonable one. You are not giving a solution, you are saying what the solution should be like. It should be symmetric, okay? So anyone can start. Let's say I start, of course, and then what do I do? If anyone can start, why shouldn't I start, right? So what should I do? What would you do? You will take your, you think we will watch and let you take it? Okay, so for n equal to 2, this is a classic folk tale, right? What is the classic folk tale? 2 people, every culture has one. In Tamil there is one with monkey and 2 appams and so on. So every culture has some story of this kind, children learn this. I cut and you choose, right? This is the algorithm. I cut and you choose. What is the idea of this I cut and you choose? Well, supposing I cut it into unequal pieces, you get first choice. So what will happen? You will walk away with the, let us say, the bigger piece, the better piece, my better piece. So what will I do? I will cut it in such a way that both pieces are equal according to my own measure, right. This is the important point. I will cut it according to my own measure. So it does not matter which you do. So this is an algorithm that guarantees fair division in this sense, fair according to. So the person who cuts is not going to envy the other person. What about the person who chooses? Can the chooser feel unhappy? So doesn't matter, you get first choice. Whichever you think is better, you take that piece. You mean the manner of cutting might be like this or like this, is that the thing? Doesn't matter, this is the point. The 2% case we two are sitting, I don't know your preference, you don't know my preference, right, fine. I cut, according to my own preference I equalize it and then you get your choice, but you get first choice. Doesn't matter, but I am saying you look at the two choices that are available on the table, right. Now what will happen? Yeah, now you make a choice, right. Now on what basis will you choose? Yes, so how will you choose? That is my question. Yeah. Use your preferences. You can't complain, right, because you are allowed first choice, so you will pick whatever is better for you, that is my point, right. I understand that you can have quarrel about vertical cut and horizontal cut and so on, I am glossing over that, right. So that I am glossing over, I am assuming that all the properties of the cake are distributed geographically continuously in some fashion such that the cut does not so that the two pieces are in a topological sense have the same properties. That is important, of course, but that is why I said this, these cuts are mathematical cuts. This is extremely important also, that and that is such a thing is possible. That such a thing is possible is an amazing thing, okay. Do you know why such a thing should be possible? Physical cake I have no idea, but mathematically it is possible. Okay, so has anyone heard of the Banach-Tarski paradox? Which says that you give me a sphere, I can cut it into two identical spheres of the same volume, and of course this is a paradox. How can you do that, right? So it's a very interesting one. If somebody is interested, we can talk about it later. Anyway, so mathematically it's possible, so that's all I am going to use, right? This is a mathematical cake with a mathematical knife. Fine. Now what about 3? Exactly, yeah. So this is the, so the algorithm is this. So what do? I cut a piece, which I think is a legitimate share, my legitimate share, right. So if nobody objects I can take it, but what if somebody objects? And then, but I won't accept it, no. I claimed something and you are cutting my piece, why should I accept that? Who is that? Yeah? I can't hear what you are saying.
Suppose I cut and you don't say it's right, then you cut and I say it's not right. So we are in a dilemma.
That's possible. So what would you suggest? Yes, I agree with you. I'm just saying what you.
If it returns to me and then I cut it again, then also there is a possibility.
Yeah, you are giving more and more bad news. I'm asking you what about some good news?
What we can do is let the first person cut, and rest all will choose which piece they want to share again. And the whole then people will be divided. Okay, the first person cuts into two pieces. So everyone will choose either they want first piece.
Okay, here is a classical algorithms guy speaking, right? There is a divide and conquer business, right? Look, there is n. In fact, what you are saying, you can even push further and divide it into groups of n by 2 and n by 2 and do, right? Divide it, make a cut, and people all group into one side to say we'll be part of this side, you'll be part of this side. The trouble is, why would I agree to such a thing at all? It's not clear to me, because supposing you cut in what you claim to be two halves, right? Turns out that n minus 1 of us want to go into one side and only one poor soul wants to go here. Is it clear that it will work? Not to me. Somehow you can come up with a reasonable, if you can come up with a division which is like roughly n by 2, you are through.
Why should it be n by 2? Okay, if one person cuts it in such a way that it's so small that only one person picks it up, it's okay.
No.
Why should it be symmetric?
Okay, not necessary at all. Okay, yeah. Still, it is not clear to me that it will reduce the problem. I am saying it might simply mean that you postpone the deadlock to the next stage. The deadlock that he is talking about.
Finally, when we come down to two people.
Finally, we may not come down there. That's my point.
Okay.
No reason why you would reduce any further.
So, we can put this condition. So, when the first person cuts, he cuts it in such a way that, okay, we can assume this, I think. So, he cuts it in such a way that, so it is equal half or something. He assumes it like that. So, when assume the deadlock condition comes only when no person chooses one particular piece, when everyone chooses only one piece. So, the deadlock can.
Oh, now I understand what you're saying. So there are n people sitting in the table, everybody is sitting there, and the first person who cuts it into roughly like according to his or her own share n by 2, right? Two halves. Okay, and then what happens?
So, everyone chooses.
So you will go on making cuts, right? But the point is, at some point, there must be n pieces on the table, right? And that those n pieces, I should agree that one of them I am happy with. There is no reason why I should agree to such a thing at all. Why should I?
As in the manner in which we divide it is like that. Okay, so if a person chooses to take a share from first piece, then he cannot later shift on to second piece.
Okay. So you need to provide some conditions like that. I can see that for 3 this is a reasonable algorithm. For n equal to 3 I can see. Not clear to me in general. I'll see that. I'll show you that already in 4 it will create a problem. But 3 it's reasonable.
Can we do like this? Like the first person makes n pieces, then the second one either takes one of the piece or cuts it n pieces in a different way according to his perception.
Okay.
The third guy can either
Okay.
choose
Fine. Okay. There are several kinds of algorithms floating around, and this is very much the name of the game. Yeah. One more.
So that we can first give some n pieces to n people, and then
What do you mean give? Who's going to?
somehow arbitrarily distribute, and then there are two people who are the difference over the other is cake is better than the exchange.
Mine, I find that it's a problem with everybody else, not 2. Right? You give me an allocation, right? I look at that piece and I say it's simply horrible, and I find that every one of the n minus 1 is better off than me. I'm not going to accept that.
So any of the other environments feel the same way as you can exchange.
But you can deadlock. That's what he's pointing out. Right? Symmetrically, you feel the same. Why is the situation any different? What is that compromise? I want to quantify it, right? I want to quantify it. Okay. So,
Divide people before cutting.
sorry,
Divide n people into before
cut the people. Okay. Yeah. Sure. I don't mind.
We
Yeah.
can make 2 groups, and this group makes a cut, and the other group chooses. Or you can make a cut on your basis, then you pass it around. Whoever feels that cut is, he also prefers a similar cut, so you can group themselves together. So you'll group people with.
No, that's what was one of the things that was said first. But there is a problem there, is what I'm saying, right? What he said earlier. Problem is this group business. Remember that the problem is about group preferences from individual preferences. I mean, this is a big classic problem, social choice theory, right? When you say see, your idea was exactly like the 2% case, divide it into n by 2 n by 2 groups, divide the cake into 2, group A and group B, one of them cuts and the other one chooses, right. But what do you mean for a group to choose? There are 8 of us in our group and we can't come to an agreement that we all together prefer this half or that half, right. So you have not solved the problem, you have just restated it, right. Okay. By the way, there is a, in social choice theory, Arrow's impossibility theorem, right. In general, whenever you are given a vector of preferences, right, and if you want some very standard axioms for preferences, like preference is transitive, if everyone prefers A over B and everyone prefers B over C, then everyone should prefer A over C, right, transitivity of preferences, 3 axioms, and you can show that there is no aggregation function. So I am saying there are mathematical reasons why it may not exist. Chalo, let us not worry about all these things. So here, so let us go back to the first solution that is suggested, because it is almost there but for a very minor point, and here is the idea. The idea is as follows. What's your name? Sorry. Pushkar. Pushkar's solution actually works with a very small modification. So let us say I start, of course I start, right. So I cut a piece which I think is good, fair piece for me, right. I put it in a dabba, put my name on it as my claim, and I pass it around the table. What do you do when it comes to your turn? You can open it and examine it. Now if you think it's okay, okay meaning okay for me to take it, then you will say okay and pass, and then it comes to her, she doesn't think it's okay, she doesn't think it's okay for me to claim such a piece. Then what will she do? Exactly like you said, she will reduce it, cut it, and a small piece of the thing she will put back into the cake. It's a magic cake, so it will all get absorbed nicely. Now there is a smaller piece which she thinks is the fair share. So what will she do? She will put her name on the dabba, that is the minor modification. Over my name she pastes her name on it and passes it around. What can happen? It keeps going, everybody looks at it, it's okay, passes it on. Somebody else wants to reduce it, will reduce it further and put his name on it. This is how it goes. Anytime the box makes a full circle of the table, I put my name on it and it comes back to me, I take it and walk out. Then there are n minus 1 persons, the smaller cake, strictly smaller cake, because remember we have reduced it, and the game continues. Is it clear? Is the, yeah? Once again?
Suppose you start first.
Yeah.
So everyone thinks that you got fresh. So everyone reduces it. And it comes to.
I understand what you are saying. Wait, I understand what it is. Before that I want to first look at what this algorithm achieves. He is the doomsday guy, he is going to tell me what it does not achieve. I know you are right, but first let me say what it does achieve. What does it achieve? Firstly, does it terminate? Can it go on forever that I keep removing an epsilon? Not possible. Why? There are only n people, right. Each time when you reduce it, you are strictly reducing it, but how much can you reduce it? It will come back to me at some point, right. And I have no incentive to cut whatever I have claimed further, right. So it's certainly true that this will not go on forever. I mean, I can set it up with continuity assumptions, blah blah blah, I can do all that formally, but basically it should be intuitively clear that anytime there is, so the algorithm will terminate, and when it terminates, what you can prove, so this is called the last diminisher method. And this is due to Banach and Tarski. I think these names should ring a, set many bells ringing. I mean, come on, these are biggest names in topology and mathematical logic and so on. What are they doing with cakes, right? So, and so what it achieves is this. If everyone wants, so you can prove if everyone wants greater than 1 by n, then everyone gets 1 by n. So this is what it achieves, is what is called proportionate division. It's a nice mathematical exercise to try and prove that this is what it achieves. If everyone has a preference, which what do I mean by 1 by n and so on when we started with measures, preferences, well, you can quantify these things. But so at least it ensures proportionate division. It doesn't ensure fair division in the sense of what we were talking about. So what can happen? That's what he said. Look, I cut a small piece, put my name on it, it goes around. Everybody says it's okay, right? I take it and get out. And just as I am eating it, I find that she claims a bigger piece with more cream, more raisins, whatever, which goes around uncontested, and she also walks out. So of course I am dying with envy. If I had known that something like that would go, that is what I would have done first, right? I think this is what you are pointing out. So certainly this is not envy free, okay, this is a double negation. So what we are looking for are envy free solutions. This method is not envy free. I will die of envy when I see somebody else getting this thing. What you want is an envy free solution, okay. So there is a formal this thing. So there is a history to this problem, okay. It's a very famous and beautiful problem proposed by Hugo Steinhaus, another very famous name in measure theory and topology. In 1940 he wrote a paper called the cake cutting problem, all of 3 pages. And the history is extremely interesting because in Krakow in Poland there were these group of mathematicians who used to meet during the Second World War. Okay, so these were all mathematicians who were out of job. Nazis had taken over Poland, and Steinhaus still had his professorship, but many others, Ulam, whom I mentioned earlier, Ulam was there, Banach was there, Tarski was there, Steinhaus was there. So these people used to meet in a cafe every week and sit in the cafe and discuss mathematics. And some of the beautiful theorems of topology that we know arise from that era. It's called the Polish cafe now because Americans couldn't pronounce Krakow, I guess. So anyway, so it's a very famous this thing. So there is a theorems from the Polish cafe. There is also a book by that, and so it's an irony because the one thing they did not have at the time in the war era was sugar. So they didn't have any cake. So it's an interesting thing that this was an abstract mathematical cake being discussed in the cafe, and Steinhaus attributes it to that. And then he poses this problem, and then in a really beautiful piece of mathematics, he shows that envy-free solutions exist. So this is for those who care about mathematics. This is not generally interesting here otherwise, but so what is this cake? You are talking about some space S on which there are n measures, mu1 to mu n are actually, they should be additive measures. In fact, what he said was countably additive measures. But today people later showed that finite additivity is enough. Basically what does it mean to say it's additive? Well, you are trying to partition the space into S1, S2, Sn, right. Additivity means that mu of S union T is greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. In fact, in this case you can even achieve equality. So let me put equality. Whatever is the measure you associate with it. Okay. Now, so countable additivity only means that you are talking about mu of union over J Sj equals, that's the idea, right. So Steinhaus's theorem says that with such measures there exists a partition of S into S1 Sn such that for all I, mu I of Si is greater than or equal to for all ij. For anyone who knows some basic measure theory, it's a half an hour class to show you that the proof of this theorem. Is it clear that this is NV free? Because it says according to my own measure, right, the allocation that I get is the best. Mu I of Si is the measure I associate with the portion Si, right. I look at the partition given, the allocation, apply my measure to it, what I get is the maximum. Each one gets the maximum according to his or her own measure, right. So this is the thing. So Steinhaus's theorem, so this is Steinhaus. Steinhaus shows that such a partition exists. Now the question is, go and find it. So this is there. And when n equal to 2, this is precisely the I cut and you choose algorithm achieves. N equal to 3, how would you do it? Well, n equal to 3 also you can do it. Let me do it as a rectangular cake and show you. So n equal to 3, so there are 3 parties A, B, C, 3 players, and A cuts it into 3 pieces according to his or her own measure, okay. Then B comes in and trims a piece to create a two-way tie. For instance, he trims this piece so that these 2 pieces are equal according to B, right. Is it clear what I am saying? A cuts it into 3 pieces x, y, z. Let us say z to z prime, so that what we have now are x, y and z prime, okay. Now C comes, so C chooses first, B next, with the proviso that if the trimmed piece is on the table is around, that is z prime, then he must choose A gets the last. Is the algorithm clear? So A cuts it into 3 pieces, B trims at most one piece to create a two-way tie, and then C chooses first. Can C complain? C cannot complain because she gets first choice. You can examine all the pieces and you do not have to take the trimmed piece because there are other pieces available. So C has no complaints. What about B? Can B complain? If the trimmed piece is gone, no reason to complain. If the trimmed piece is around, anyway it is B who said that this is a fair share, right. Remember, one of these 2 pieces is anyway going to be available. This was a tie, right. If there is no reason to cut anything at all, you would have left it as it is. At most one piece is what I say, right. So B has no reason to complain. A has no reason to complain at all because A cut it this way and the diminished piece is already gone. So A is going to get one of these 2 pieces and no reason to complain at all because A was the one who cut according to. So no reason. So is it clear that neither of them envies the other, but there is a trimmed piece floating around. What about the trimmed piece? How do they divide that? You should divide that or no, right? Okay. Somebody got the trimmed piece. Who got the trimmed piece? Either it's C or B. So at the end of the first round, there are 3 people left. Let me call them T, NT and A, right? Yeah? Okay. Now there are these 3 parties and so how should they divide it among them? That's why I'm saying the T, NT and A are there, so one of them should cut. Who should cut? T should cut, okay. T cuts into 3 pieces. Okay. And then what order do they choose it in? Or do you want to go through this again? You can go through this again, but it will be, asymptotic. So you don't want this asymptotic. You want it to end right now. Yeah. It can. So, any ideas? Actually, let's say T cuts, okay. Now, there are 3 pieces around. Remember that as far as A is concerned, yes, so they choose in this order, T and TA. T is the one who got the trimmed piece earlier. So, he gets first choice now. The person who got the non-trimmed piece earlier has no cause to complain anyway. Anything you get is bonus, right? So, no problem. And as far as A is concerned, anything that you get long after this. And I also pointed out that this technique that they have given doesn't work for 4. So, okay. So, then Conway after a few years, I think, no, I think this was Conway in 62, sorry. Conway in 62, Conway and Selfridge in 68 gave for n equal to 4, and that is where it remained for a while. And then Steve Brahms gave an algorithm in the 80s for 5, and in 92 Brahms and Taylor gave the algorithm for all n. So, for all n. Now, I do not want to tell you the algorithm, but if you remember in the case of n equal to 2, you start with 3 cuts. For n equal to 4, you start with 5 cuts. For the Brahms and Taylor algorithm, you start for all n, it starts with 2 to the n minus 2 cuts. And then it works. It's a clever algorithm, interesting algorithm, not my main focus, so I don't want to spend time on that. But what is extremely interesting is that finding an algorithm which uses only polynomially bounded cuts, polynomial in n is an open problem, to tell you that. And this is 92. So, since then there has been like extremely interesting work on this. So, for instance, proportionate division, if you look at the algorithm that I talked about, this is not an efficient algorithm. So, proportionate division efficient algorithms exist. In Soda 2000, there is a nice paper which shows that it is order n log n. N log n cuts suffice and it is a lower bound, it is all done. Soda is the Symposium on Discrete Algorithms, a nice algorithms conference. And I think in Fox 2003 there was a paper which gives an approximate algorithm for NV free division. But as I said, coming up with anything where you have by now a straightforward exponential algorithm and a polynomial time algorithm is not known, of course it's a it's like invitation, right. So there's a lot of interesting work going on, but and of course the approximation crowd is always there to give a PTAS algorithm and so on. So there is something going on in this thing as recently as now, right. Remember we are talking about a problem that was discussed in the late 30s according to Steinhaus and written about in 1940, and to me it's a classic case of interaction between mathematics and computer science, right. The mathematics involved is measure theory, where you show that there exists a division, NV free division, but coming up with an algorithm that achieves it can take a long time, and still we are not sure about where we have got. But for those who think about this, there are like all kinds of interesting connections with this problem, okay. For instance, in combinatorial topology, there is a theorem by Davidson and Su. Oh no, somebody and Su. His name is David Su. So anyway, Su is a big name in combinatorial topology, but he shows connections with Hall's theorem on perfect matchings and this, because okay, so there is another theorem by Reinhardt which says that instead of NV free, okay, suppose I want the solution to be super NV free. Super NV free says that I want an allocation whereby what I get is strictly greater than everybody else's according to my measure, right. And he proves a beautiful theorem which says that a super NV free solution exists if and only if the measures are linearly independent. Okay, so why would you even suspect something like that to be true? So this is one. The other one, which as I said, think of the cake as the real interval 0, 1. Okay, that's what it is for most purposes. That will do, right? You just wanted something to be infinitely divisible. That's the critical one that's used in many of these algorithms. And then you can say, you know, supposing there are 3 people, every allocation you can think of, right, as a sum of 3 numbers that add to 1, right. So basically I can think of it as a triangulation and look at all possible triangles that you can get, and then you can ask, you know, what is the solution that you are looking for. So there is a kind of geometric meaning for R3 that I am saying, but in general you can go to Rn. So for people interested, I can show you these connections, I mean I can give you references. This is to tell you that what you can start with a very innocuous problem. Distributed computing is full of problems that are very innocuous when you begin with, but can have a lot of very, very interesting mathematical structure and algorithmically quite challenging. Okay, so this is enough for this problem. Let me move to more classic algorithmic questions. That's what I am going to talk about tomorrow and day after, and a bit today also. So I don't know so much about how far these things relate to, I don't know, web services and blah blah, but there is at least a good mathematical theory awaiting when we understand distributed algorithms better. That's the message I wanted to give you. But the design of distributed algorithms, this is as good a question as any other, right? You understand, right? This is a resource allocation problem, right? What is the cake that we are talking about? A resource for which n people are in contention. We all want part of the resource, right? And think of it as we are on the web and there is a resource and we are web based algorithms trying to compete for the resource. Could be bandwidth, right? Could be bandwidth, could be any of these. Spectrum, right? And you are talking about protocols for spectrum allocation, if you want to think about it this way, right? Okay, so here is the standard model that we will work with, and let's start with the most simple problem. What's the first question in algorithms that you always begin with? Well, as far as I know, the first thing that you begin with is there are n numbers, you want to find the maximum or you want to find the minimum. How do you do that? The n numbers are presented to you somehow, you go through them in order, compare and keep comparing, pick the local maximum and compare against the local maximum, keep on going, and how many comparisons do you need? N minus 1 comparisons. With n minus 1 comparisons you find the maximum. What can you do better than that? It's a lower bound. Why is it a lower bound? Sorry?
Every number has to be compared at least once.
That's why I am asking you why. How do you prove that?
With every comparison, there can be only one loser.
Right. So how do you show that every number has to be compared against? Maybe by some mysterious way I claim that I can find a maximum in future.
Other number is the maximum. The remaining number which is
What do you mean can be maximum? There is just a fixed number is given to you. So this is formally, so you must learn the argument, that's what I am saying. These things are called adversary arguments. An adversary is sitting there who has control over the input given to you. Remember, think of lower bound always, these arguments always as a 2% zero sum game, right? I have control, I don't have control over the input. I am an algorithm, that means what? No matter what the input is, I have to produce the correct output, right? So that means you are the adversary, you will give me the input as you like. I won't be able to see all the numbers. Supposing I can see all the numbers in the beginning, you can't change it afterwards. Remember the guessing the number game that I was talking about, right? It's in your interest to make me take as much time as possible, It's in your interest to force me to do n minus 1 comparisons. So that means you will not give the entire input in one shot, right? You will just show me one number at a time. There are n numbers, you will throw one number at me, I will do something. You will throw another number at me, I will do something, because you have no control over what I will do internally, right? To force me to take n minus 1 comparisons, you will delay the maximum further and further. So you can set it up as a game and argue that there is a strategy by which the adversary can force me to do n minus 1 comparison. That gives the lower bound. Okay. Yeah. So this is the thing. Now we are now talking about processes connected on a graph. So for now, for today, let me assume that the graph is a cycle. So the processes are connected like this. If you want bidirectional, let me keep it unidirectional or bidirectional. Ring, usually these call it ring, it's a cycle anyway. Now you are looking at the same problem, but this problem has got a name in distributed computing world, it's called leader election. Why leader election? Well, it's because there are many situations where, like we started with here, one simple solution is there is a symmetry in the problem, everybody is equal, you have no idea how to break this thing. So you elect a leader and then ask the leader to perform a computation. Okay. One classic problem is deadlock. Deadlocks happen in distributed computers all the time. So somebody has to detect that a deadlock has happened and then isolate that part. So, and that process is not going to be God given in any way, so you elect a leader and you proceed. So leader election is a standard algorithm. Now how do you elect a leader, on what basis do you elect a leader? Manifestos, elections, promises of free TV, etc., etc. So no such thing, this is just based on simple thing, we will say IDs. Okay. So one way is that every process has its own ID and you take the maximum of the IDs, and whoever is the maximum ID at any point of time is the leader, as long as IDs are distinct. So you need some way by which every process coming into the system gets a unique ID, that is distinct from everybody else. So it's a unique ID. So as long as such a facility exists, you do. This is how practically it's done. Most protocols use these algorithms. But let's not worry about it. Algorithmically, what is the question given to us? There are n processors, each one is sitting on a value P1, P2, P3, etc., Pn, right? This is what it means. Each process is sitting with a number and you want to find the maximum, exactly like the old problem. But what is the difficulty now? There is no single process that has all the n numbers. If you try to do that, you centralize the, of course you can always centralize it and solve, but that is silly. One of the important motivations which I didn't mention for distributed computing at all, and that's one thing that runs through the entire theory, is fault tolerance. If one of the processes crash, you don't want the entire system to crash, right? That's the whole point about it. I mean, internet would not work if it was subject to failures happening anywhere in the world, right? The whole point is that they should be autonomous so that you can detect failures and isolate these components. Okay. By the way, one of the important triggers for this was the Challenger space shuttle. How many people have heard of this? Yes, 96. It was a very dramatic one. No, 86 or 86. Yeah, 86. It was a very dramatic one because there was a, it was the first time they were sending people on it, and in fact, one school teacher called Krista McAuliffe, she went on the space shuttle, and then it took off, and quite a part of the world was watching on television. It was a big thing, and then it crashed. I mean, it was a very terrible thing, a dramatic loss. And then US government set up a committee to look into what went wrong. Richard Feynman was the chairman of the committee, and they looked at what went wrong. And one of the things they found was, of course, Feynman found all kinds of extremely interesting things. So anybody who reads Feynman's book there is a book, it's there in the library, it's called What Do You Care What Other People Think? As aggressive as that. This is Feynman anyway, but it's highly entertaining. So he describes things that happened there. But one of the things that was clear was that was a problem, was a communication problem between the different components. See, a space shuttle, you will have one computer managing navigation, you will have one computer managing power supply, one computer managing communications with the earth, one computer managing something else, taking photos or something, right? It must be that way, right? You must have autonomous computers doing this job. Why is that important? Because if something fails, you should isolate it and the other things should move on, right? So you don't want to centralize these things. So the space shuttle, this is 86, okay, this was one of the major impetus for distributed computing, coming up with distributed algorithms, because they need to be fault tolerant. So people realize the importance for proving these things, because if there is bad coordination among these things, the whole thing can collapse, right? Now of course many safety critical applications, reactor core control of these things and so on, you will find many applications now, but that time it was a bit considered a bit exotic, but as I said, internet didn't exist at the time, right? So people didn't think of it. So something like this is not such an artificial problem, right? In that case, what we are looking at is all these processes must coordinate for achieving, a single decision. They are all proceeding autonomously, but they must come together and make a decision, right? So you can think of these as game players, okay, working autonomously and having to make a decision. Anyway, so how do you solve this problem? Firstly, look at the problem, it's entirely symmetric. Okay, so this is a term that we will keep using, so I might as well. When do you say that the problem is symmetric? It means that you permute all the players, all the processes, it should look the same. The problem should remain the same, right? Whether I sit on this node or that node, it should not make any difference. In this case, the graph is also a cycle, it's all possible symmetries are there. Then, okay, what else is there? Okay, so what is the model? What is our computational model? So let us say that computation proceeds in rounds. This is just a logical abstraction. And in each round, what do? I send some messages to other processes. In this case, who are the people I can send messages to? Neighbor. Let me make it bidirectional so you don't even have to worry about that. So I can communicate with so in any round, what will I do? I will send messages to all my neighbors. Symmetrically, my neighbor is sending messages to me. So what will I do? I will receive messages from my neighbors, right? Remember that in each round, what messages I send will be independent, because in the previous round I have done whatever I have learnt, based on that I compute something and I send to my neighbors, and then I receive, okay. This is important because the order can be very distinct. So I receive and then we keep doing. Next round I am ready for, we keep doing this. Is it clear? This is the idea of the basic model. Now what does it mean to say that you elect a leader? Let us say that every process has a local Boolean variable B, right. At the end of the protocol, what do you want? We want B is assigned true by exactly one process at the end. We want and of course this also means it's false for every other process, right. Of course very often you will have the extra requirement that everybody knows who is the leader also, because if you want it to be useful for a protocol, you will also want, so that then one way is to say that it's not Boolean, it's a number and B is assigned a maximum ID by all the processes. So that's one way, but the basic problem is only this. How do you solve this problem? So don't worry about IDs and so on. The statement is there are n processes, they communicate this way, and you want the algorithm to exchange messages, whatever, do whatever you want, but when they terminate, they must know when they have terminated. And so what do you mean they must know? Every process has a state called terminated, let us say, right. There is a well defined state where every process is in the terminated state and this Boolean is assigned true by exactly one process. So how do you solve this problem? How do you solve it? What should each process know, etc., right? These are the questions to solve the problem. Any idea?
We can start with any process, and then the next, when you go to the next process, it will ask whether the new number is greater than the previous number.
But as stated, there are no IDs in the problem. There are no numbers. I just mentioned this. In the application, that will be the case. But as stated, the problem is there are n processes situated on a ring, and they proceed in rounds. At the end, you want this to be done. This is the statement, no? Of course, if you want more things, you should ask for it. But as stated, for electing a leader, there is no such thing as, right? If you can find a leader without all that, what do you suspect in this case? Any hunch? Brilliant. What is the point? Somebody may say I am the leader and send messages. That's possible. But then somebody else will also say I am the leader. Very similar to that stuff, right? I want this, I want this. Is something to you? Okay.
You send a message saying you are the leader, and if your neighbor accepts, then he'll send a message and so on. You can
Correct.
go that way.
But what if he doesn't accept?
Then he'll say he's the leader and he'll send a message forward saying that I want to be the leader.
There can be a continuous cycle.
What is that?
Like if I say I'm the leader,
Yeah.
then I send a message forward.
Yeah.
Now
But what if you send it to me and I don't accept that you are the leader? In fact, I want to be the leader. What will I do?
then I'll send a message back in both directions saying I want to be the leader, and the cycle will continue. that
Yes, but everybody wants to do exactly the same thing. So why not?
Then we need to have some quantification in which we can have preference over, one can have preference over the other.
But everybody prefers to be the leader, right? Now I'm not just being bloody minded. The point is that there is no way you can make such assumptions, right? So if you want some way to break the symmetry, you must bring it in, right? But before that, and this is the thing, a very simple proposition which says that there is no symmetric deterministic solution to the finished. There is no solution, right? How do you prove this? Well, whatever I said is enough to do, right? Suppose there is an algorithm that achieves there is a symmetric deterministic solution to the leader election problem. It runs in I said it runs in rounds, right? Let's say it runs in k rounds. Do induction on k. So the proof is, suppose such an algo exists and achieves leader election in k rounds, induction on k. Okay. What's the base case? Right, the initial case. Initial case, all processes are in the same boat, right? So I should have given the initial configuration that B is false for all processes. There is no leader, right? Fine. What about the step? And this is the important thing. In the kth round, what does the process do? At the end of the k minus 1 rounds, no leader has been elected, right? Inductively, B is false at the end of the k minus 1th round. Now, these being symmetric and deterministic, that means every process, right, sends identical message to its left and right neighbors, right, because all processes behave identically now, right, and the rule they use is symmetric, so they must all send the same messages to their neighbors. So what is the message received by each process? Identical. All processes send exactly the same messages, receive exactly the same messages. So whatever function they compute, right, to decide B should be true or false is identical for all the processes. The input to the functions are identical, so therefore the output will also be identical. So if one process sets it B to true, every other process must be setting B to true, right. So it is not possible that exactly one process sets B to true. You can just argue and convince yourself that symmetry. Another is by breaking determinacy, you can flip coins, okay. So I will get to randomization a little later, but let us first look at breaking symmetry, right. Breaking symmetry means I need to introduce an initial asymmetry, and that is the idea of introducing IDs. If you are going to bring some asymmetry, you might as well make it all asymmetric, right. So let us get back to that problem. So let us assume that M1, M2, M3 and so on, Mn, and let me say that I will change the statement to say that B is true for the process with maximum ID. So every process has an ID, a number, and you have distinct IDs. Initial configuration is given to you with distinct IDs, and they send messages to each other, and at the end the leader should be the process with the maximum ID. And in fact we can take it to the standard requirement that every process should know the identity of the leader, but do not worry about it if that bothers you. But now how would you solve the problem? It is quite straightforward, so let us just see what you should do. So there are all these processes with their IDs, and we do not know where the maximum is sitting, and every process knows its own ID, but it has no clue whether what it has got is the maximum or not, right. Now how do they do? What should every process do? First you should send your ID to your right neighbor, left neighbor, whatever. So what does a process do? A process wakes up at any time, it simply sends its message to the, let us say one direction is enough, sends it to the right neighbor, yeah, and then what should a process do on receiving an ID from a left neighbor? Compare locally, and if I find that what I have got is bigger than my number, then what do? I pass it along. If I find that whatever I have got received is less than my own value, then what do? No, that I would have sent anyway. Remember, every process sends its own IDs, right, that is not dependent on what I receive. Is that clear? I always send it to my right neighbor. Now question is, what should I do when I receive a message? I look at the value received. If the value received is greater than mine, I pass it along. If the value received is smaller than mine, what should I do? Simply swallow it, do not pass it along, that is all, right. Any value that is bigger than mine, it could be a potential maximum, I should pass it along. I already know that mine is bigger than this contestant, so I just eat it, right, and that is it. Now what happens? Any time I find my own ID returning to me, I know I am the neighbor, I am the leader, right. I send it to my right and I find my ID coming from the left, then I know that I am the leader. I announce to the world, hey, I am the leader. Is it clear? First, is the correctness clear? What is the correctness? First, the maximum ID will go around. There is a maximum, they are distinct IDs, so there exists a maximum, and that maximum ID will be transmitted by that process, and everyone who is acting according to the protocol will keep forwarding it, and since it is a cycle, it will come back to the original process. So, maximum ID will go around the ring. Will any other ID go around the ring? Take the second maximum. What will happen to the second maximum? At some point it will visit the fellow with the maximum ID who will swallow it. So, second maximum for instance will not move. By that token, anything with a smaller ID will not move. Therefore, the one, if some value is announced, some value will be announced as leader, and that value will be the maximum ID. So, that is correctness. How many messages are you using? Well, take a ID, the ith ID, right, okay. How far does it travel in general? If you rank the IDs in descending order, right, or ascending order as you like. Okay, what is the maximum ID travels distance? N. Potentially every ID can travel a distance n before it can be swallowed, right. So, the algorithm that we talked about runs in order n squared, okay.